Our next speaker is a spectacular speaker. I met him back when I was just a young junior resident. He is now the founding program director at Loyola, where he is just creating one heck of a program, it sounds like. And so, if nothing else, you will be entertained by his accent, I promise you that. So without further ado, I'm going to let Dr. David Snow take it away.
Oh, so I get a clap before I begin? Can everyone hear me at the back? We good? Yes. All right, I like to walk around, so you're just going to have to deal with this. So, as Dr. Stull pointed out, I'm David Snow. I'm the new PD at Loyola. I've been there about 10 months. Our first class starts in 2 months' time. I was the APD at UIC for 5 years before that, and then a chief the year before that. So, my talk was initially going to be called The Problem Resident, but then I realized that a lot of the issues that you may face during your year as chief aren't the fault of the residents, so I changed it to be The Problem with Residents. And I felt like this picture was appropriate because this might be the look on your face when you encounter some of these situations. So not only do I talk with an accent, I also mumble. And I'm fighting some kind of voice thing right now with a URI, so you guys are in for a real treat. So let's work through this. So an outline for the day, there's 4 cases, and each table has 1 case. You're going to work through them as a group, and you're going to get about 5 minutes or so to review them. And then we're going to come back in and have a beautiful interactive discussion on what are some of the things that you would do to work through these cases. Now, I'm not going to have like one person from the group stand up or anything like that. I'll just look for, like when I say, who has case 1, can you guys tell me something about what you guys talked about? And we'll go that way. If nobody says anything, I'll just stare awkwardly for the amount of time it takes for someone to speak. And that's a skill I'm pretty good at. But I might buckle after about 60 seconds. Yes. Yes. And as long as, here's the thing, as long as essentially it's being done in the best interest of the resident, there's no wrong answer. There is no wrong answer, right? I just might lead you a little bit in things that I think are important for it, because for better or for worse, all of these situations are situations, and then some, that I've been in the past 5.5, 6 years. So, we'll review the 4 cases, and then I'll shut it down for about 5 minutes. Case 1, you're working a clinical shift, and a PGY2 is not carrying their weight. Yes. The off-service resident has more patients than them, and this is not the first time this has happened. Oh, beautiful day. Case 2, you're working a clinical shift again. You seem to work a lot. A fellow senior resident, one of your classmates, appears hungover. Ooh, ouch. A nurse approaches you. A patient actually smelled the alcohol and is now bringing it to your attention. Oh, this gets interesting. Case number 3, you've got a day off. Why have you got a day off as a chief? That's outrageous. But you've got no admin duties. It's a true day off. And then you get a text, oh, joyous text, with a picture of another resident's Facebook page with a Facebook post that has some pretty bad information, HIPAA-violating, disparaging comments about a patient, just stuff where you're like, oh, come on, it's my day off. Welcome to residency leadership. Case 4, a bad one, another day off. Why have you got 2 days off? Who's your PD? A fellow resident notifies you that the husband of one of your residents has died. It's a sudden and unexpected death. So, with that happy lead-in, we're going to look at these 4 cases. And the big questions that I want you to think about is, what are the 3 immediate next steps? In your mind, the situation has dropped on you right now. What are you going to do about it? Kind of rising chiefs. These are very potentially real situations that I hope don't happen, but they very well might. What are the next 3 things that you think are the key things to do? And then what I think is important is, what's your role in this? Because sometimes throughout being a chief, it can be hard. Like, you get lost in the logistics and making schedules and dealing with little things, and then these big things come up, and you're like, oh, this is real. So just think about what your role is in that. So now I'll stop, take about 5 minutes or so, talk, and then we'll come back in.
Yes, I'm here now. I found you. Thank you. I'm sitting back there going, where's my phone?
Where's your phone? Stopwatch. Start. Okay.
So what are your girls' names?
Sophia. All right, team. There's nothing obnoxious about that. Okay, I'm hoping all this discussion was about the cases. If not, glad you got time to catch up. So let's bring it back in, and we're going to work through each of these cases in turn. And I told you this face might be appropriate. Like, as you think through these, some are easier than others to work through. I feel like some are just, they're going to be inherently very, very challenging. And I think it's important to think through this so you have some sort of framework to deal with these situations when they come. But I think it's also important to talk about this so you can understand, as you lead into this position, just how important your role is to the residencies. And if you don't think that you're critical to each of these types of situations, then you're underestimating the role of the chief. You have an immense opportunity to change the path for the better of a residency program. How you define yourself in times of hardship, to me, is what defines you as leaders. It might be the one true defining thing, is how someone does in times of adversity. So that's why I think this is important, not only from the standpoint of giving you the confidence to know that you can influence these things, but to also think through like how you might do that. So, with that, let's go with case one, and we'll review. This is basically the resident who's not carrying their clinical weight on shift. So, if anyone's nice enough and wants to shout out some things that they think are good, immediate next steps and what their role is in this, then have at it. Otherwise, you've got to listen to me for another half hour. Is that the blue one? Yes.
Talk to the resident, figure out the extenuating circumstances, why you're there or why really that lack of care or something like that, and then for a while. Make sure there's nothing else surrounding this.
So I'll review that one. Just thank you for getting the mic over. Basically, just talk to the resident. Are there other things at play that caused this? Absolutely. What else? Put your hand up, and then we can make sure we get the mic to you. Got front here, and then front also.
So we had just talked about the importance of resisting the urge to call them out in the moment. You know, this is probably a conversation that's better had after the shift in private.
Totally agree. I'm going to add nothing to this, essentially. Keep going. You guys are...
We wanted to start by asking a resident, how do you think you're doing? Sometimes they don't realize it's an issue, or sometimes our duty is to let them know, give them the assessment, and then sometimes they realize it's an issue and there's some other circumstances that might lead them to open up to you.
I totally agree. Those answers are as perfect, I think, as you can give. I'm biased because they match my answers, thus they inherently must be perfect. I'm kidding, I'm not that guy. But I think so going through it, first off is fact-finding. To me, things, they kind of follow one or two pathways. Do I need to stop what I'm doing right now and get in touch with the PD because it's career or life-threatening? Or do I have some time to figure some stuff out? And that's what I would say in this, and that's what was brought up by the people who are kind enough to speak out. You've got time to get some more information. So go on like a fact-finding journey. Talk to those you know and trust. People that have worked around that resident. Like, is this something, like confidentially, can I just ask you, is this something that you've noticed is an issue? And you might have attendings that you trust more than others because you know that they're not going to just react in the heat of the moment. That resident's lazy. And that's it. They're now lazy. There's no sort of substance to that labeling. So just get in there and talk to the people who may have worked around the resident. Has this already been addressed? Is this a known issue? Now, I put in the case that this has happened before, but like, what does that mean? Has it been like a sit-down discussion with a resident? You're not carrying your weight. And then what were the details of that discussion? Was there a plan put together? And that's the only time. If this might have been something that's come up before, I think it's reasonable then to engage the program director early on this. But if this is something that seems like pretty fresh, pretty new, then I don't think you need to go to the PD. You can always do it, If you're questioning it, and in no way is that a bad thing at all, please don't think it in any way that it is. But I feel like the best experience you can get as a chief is trying to work through some of this truly hypercritical stuff, like some of the other cases that we have, in your own way. Start to kind of think through what your plan might be before you involve people. Because you can absolutely do that as chief, and that's okay to do it. And I feel like you're going to get way more out of the year if you start to try and work through this with the residents. And then exactly what was said, talking to the residents. And I have watched already attendings call this out on shift, you know? Like, what are you doing? Ortho resident has more patience than you. What the hell's going on? You're just like, oh, come on. Nobody wins in that situation. Because what happens if you got called out on that, you would immediately jump on the defensive, right? You would dislike that person forever unless they handled it amazingly, surprisingly, appropriately after that fact. But more than likely, they're just going to get defensive. And that's exactly it. Exactly what was said. You must remove them from the clinical setting. And I kind of like the approach of, like, during the shift, like, just kind of nonchalantly, let's go chat about something, or after the shift, you meet them as they're walking out. Not too keen on the, let's do it before your shift, because then they're going to walk in, their head's going to be kind of messed up in a way, like thinking through, depending on what the circumstances are. You don't want people bringing in baggage to a shift. That's like my big thing. You've got to come in with a clear head, ready to work. And then just ask them, what do they know? What do you know? Like, how do you feel about this? What's your context of this? Exactly that. Like, it just happened to be 2 shifts where I was in dealing with complicated patients. What do you want from me? It's like, cool, nothing. Glad that we were able to talk about this. Okay, now I've got a frame of reference. Carry on, you know? But then you might get, actually, I'm pretty crap at documentation. Or I had a bad experience with a patient, and because of that, I've just been, maybe someone else can grab that patient next time. Confidence is low, whatever it is. There might be something else in there. And that's where it starts to get interesting. And that's where I feel like the chief really has a role to play. Because me, as someone in the attending leadership team coming up to a resident and doing this, I feel like immediately it becomes something big, right? If you're before the PD, you must have really done something wrong, and that's not fair a lot of the time, right? If it's extenuating circumstances, they shouldn't feel like that, because they're immediately going to clam up and get defensive, and then I might not ever get what I need to, that you might be able to get as a friend, a co-resident, a colleague. And I think it's important for all of these things just to remind the resident that you do this because you care about their success. You're not just checking a box. Like with me, sometimes I feel like it's going to be, or it has been, oh, I hope this doesn't get out of hand, because then I need to tell the ACGME about it, right? And I hate that side of things, but it's ultimately, like, if people are not doing their job, then, and I can't fix it, then there's a bigger issue than that. But I try and, like, not make that the point of the discussion with a resident. But for you guys, it's your residents. Like, you're also a resident. So there's that ability to really just let them know, like, I want you to be the best that you can be, so let's figure this out together. And then, like, the forming of the plan is challenging, but offer your insight, offer a strategy. And depending on what the issue is, obviously the plan itself will be tailored accordingly, but let's take documentation as an issue. So they're just pretty slow with documentation. They're a late first year or early second year in this case. I guarantee you there's someone in either the residency group or the faculty group who is outstanding at this, who you can approach and say, hey, I've got this resident who's struggling with this. Can they spend some awkward time just watching you document? Do you mind sitting with them and kind of telling them how you approach some of this stuff? And then just letting the resident know that you're going to check in. And this might be one of the things that we do bad at. Like, we're great at addressing problems and coming up with a plan, but then the downstream effect. And this is really where you can set yourself apart in leadership. And do it up front. Let them know. Like, a week or two, you've got some shifts coming up. I'm just going to check back in. I'm going to talk to some people that you're working with and make sure that this is progressing. I'm going to talk to you and make sure it's progressing. If there's issues, you let us know. You're not supposed to know how to do everything in residency. It's the residency's job to make you stronger in those areas that you're weak in. And I'm going to make sure that we're doing our part in that. And then dialogue with the residency leadership team. And all of these, if you want to immediately get the PD or whomever involved, totally fine to do that. But at some point, you're going to have to let them know, right? I mean, that's inevitable, but I think you're going to get way more out of it if you start to work through these sort of non-hypercritical situations on your own. So, your role, awareness, and support are the two big ones, I feel like. So, that's case one. I got 3 more to get through here. Any questions about this? If not, let's jump in. Case 2. Oh, dear. So you got a resident who smells like booze. Who's got this case? Who wants to shout out some big next steps, things that are critical? Take like one, and then I'll jump in. Anyone want to shout anything out? Please. We've got a hand up in the middle of the room. 75% back. It's about 35 yards from me.
Sure. We had case 2. We talked about that in this situation, the first step would be to approach the resident immediately, that there's potential patient safety issues and legality going on. So this was stop what we're doing, pull the resident aside, speak him directly, find out what's going on from him. If he has, things going on in his life, if he is drunk and willing to talk about it, to go from there, give him a chance to talk. We actually discussed the possibility that some of our emergency rooms have breathalyzers, and we could potentially breathalyze them right there, and if it's 0, can end it right now. But just pulling him aside, let him know what's going on, what's being said about him or her, and then taking the next steps from there. And then because of the patient safety issue, it may be appropriately like removing him from patient care and activating whatever backup there is if necessary. And this would be a situation where we would let the leadership know. I think in our group we talked about how overall role as chief in this scenario would be to protect the patient, protect the resident, make sure that he or she's given the chance to explain what's going on and is not having like an unfair allegation against them, but also protecting patients.
Fantastic. Thank you. The one part that might get sketchy there is the breathalyzer one. That's like I commend the thought, I really do, but that logistically might be a tough one to work through, So, but the rest of it, I'm fully on board with. Yeah, immediately. This is like you're kind of doing probably 2 things at the same time, but one of those is we got to let the PD know. It's career threatening. That's an immediate. They need to be engaged in this. This is a big deal, as you rightly said. And then are there bigger issues, right? And that'll come into play when we start to talk to the resident. Like what? What were you thinking? What's going on? Talk to me, But yeah, the PD needs to know. And then AMA Code of Ethics says that this is wholly unethical to show up for work under the influence of a controlled substance or alcohol. That's not surprising to hear that, I'm sure, but they absolutely cannot be around patients. You got to send them home. They're done. And it might not be the right time at that moment to have that discussion, just depending on the circumstances and who's there. I think their attending should be the one to send them home, because if this is a classmate, you're kind of like in this kind of weird zone of like sending a classmate home, but I don't think it's wrong at all for you to do that if the attending who's there, you're like, I don't think you're going to handle this in an appropriate way. And I feel like any reasonable person, and again, we're dealing with someone on shift who smells like booze, but any reasonable person, if you approach them and say, you can't be around patients, they're going to be like, yeah, you're right, I got to go. And it's really to avoid patient harm, and it's to give them time to reflect. And that then leads into the talking part. And this might be really, really hard, because this flies the spectrum of, I knew I shouldn't have gone out last night. I'm an idiot. I hope I don't get fired. I will never do this again, which is what you hope for in a weird way. All the way to, oh yeah, I got a real problem. I can't believe it's taken anyone this long to actually catch me, And that's what you would hate for the resident, obviously. But there's a big spectrum here. So you just approach them like, what happened? What were you doing? Are you aware of what the consequences are of this decision? And I had some moments in residency where I acted in a way where I wasn't thinking about consequences. Unfortunately, I had people around me to be like, are you aware of what you're doing right now? And it's okay. Sometimes we lose the big picture. We lose actually what it is that we're there for, to take care of patients. And we think that we're just residents. It's okay if I go out and have some drinks the night before. A bunch of my classmates have done it. They never had anything happen to them, so I'm doing it too. I can't, as much as I will disagree with it, I can see the reasoning, right? So letting them talk is a good thing. And again, going back to, are there bigger issues? And again, going back to, you care about their success. This is not checking boxes. This is your co-resident. So that empathetic approach to things is really a defining thing in the way that you manage situations. If people know that you care, they're going to open up and be receptive to whatever it is you do, than if you just come in with this, you're an idiot. You can't do that. They'll be like, oh, thanks a lot. Okay, cool. See you later, you know. So your role is, it's the PD involvement and patient care, and then resident well-being, right? The things that we talked about. So, case 3. This is the, please.
So, I mean, what about the other side of that? What if the resident, like, there's high suspicion for it, and the resident is still denying everything? How do you approach it from that point? You still, if they're denying it flat out, no, this isn't going on, and everything like that, you still just say, okay, guilty until proven innocent, go ahead and send it home because there's concern for it, or?
Ooh, that's great. Wow, you really, like, flipped it on me there. So if they're like, I don't smell like booze, you smell like booze. You're like, wait a second, maybe I do. No, it's my cologne. He's like, that's my cologne too. Ooh, very, very challenging. That's when you kind of start tripping pathways of GME and HR involvement, because there are fit-for-duty policies in place at essentially every institution. It's one of those things that has to be there, where they can absolutely do things like the breathalyzer, drug screens, that type of thing that will fall into play there. Yeah, you won't be left on your own there. Totally fair question. All right, so this is the Facebook one. You got just a HIPAA violation, disparaging comments. So with that case, who had that one? What are you doing with that? This is why I don't friend current residents, because I'm like checking up on my friends from back home and looking at baby pictures. I don't want to see this. You're like, you ruined my day. I've got to do something about this now. So I leave that up to you. I'm not telling you that that's how you should have your Facebook, but there you have it. So what do you think?
Immediately having them take it down.
Yes.
Notifying the program director and our co-chiefs to let them know what's going on. Contact the HIPAA team in the hospital, because the patient has to be made aware that their
that's good. Yeah.
Protected information was
Head it off at the
divulged.
pass. Yes.
And plan a face-to-face meeting to hear their side, and form a plan, not necessarily for disciplinary action, but to form a plan moving forward of how to deal with whatever issue caused this to happen.
Beautiful. I love that. And I'll hit on that too in terms of something like a social media policy. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah, talk to the resident. An immediate face-to-face if you can. If you can't, phone's fine. And just like this is where it's appropriate to be. What the hell were you thinking? And then just shut up and just let them talk. And they might be completely clueless. Like I've had a situation like this where it was like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. Surprised it took this long for X-resident to do this. And then that made me think, that's our fault. That's actually my fault. We should have, one, headed off at the pass. Number two, we should have had some sort of policy and brought that policy to the residents to talk through it. They've got to remove the posts. And they've got to be aware of the legal implications. There are people, there was a program in Chicago a few years ago where a doc posted pictures of a young female, teenage female, in a hallway bed who was intoxicated. There have been people who have been fired from their job for commenting on posts, for liking posts that were controversial because they were HIPAA violation stuff. So, food for thought. Food for thought for those things. It's kind of scary when you start looking into it. The PD has to be involved. It's career threatening. And a wider discussion is needed. And that's where the plan really comes in. The entire residency needs to discuss this. And maybe not like that exact example, but they've got to talk about why this is wrong. They've got to talk about like what went into the thoughts behind that. And then if your residency doesn't have a social media policy, I can almost guarantee you that the GME does. But EM's just a little bit different. And there's things like emdocs.net that, given any opportunity to rail on that, I will take it. I just think there's so much wrong about that. Yeah, it's always a rash. Yeah, it's usually not life-threatening. That's emdocs, I feel like, on Facebook. But there's people like violating HIPAA all the time. Oh, yeah, the patient said this was okay for me to post this picture about them and their life and their medical illness. Like, really? Did you have them fill out a form where they knew that they were signing away those rights? Or did you just say, hey, you cool with me posting this? And then, like, when you start looking at the cases where people have been fired and disciplined for commenting and liking on stuff, what if the patient comes back and says, no, there's no paperwork, I didn't agree to that. Like, you're done. If you commented on that post. So this is where EM becomes a little bit different, and having a social media policy that addresses these things can be protective. Talk about it with the residents. If you Google social media policy, like, there are many examples out there. So your role, resident awareness, helping the residents to succeed, and that's case 3. 5 minutes. Beautiful. Right on time. Nobody has questions? Case 4. And this is the tough one, right? This is one where you get a call that the resident's spouse has died. So, who wants to share what they would do in that unfortunate situation? Yes, please. Right. Thank you.
Hi,
Don't let that microphone scare you away.
No,
I appreciate you.
Yeah. So we said the first thing we thought that should be done was to contact our program director,
Definitely.
have them contact the resident themselves, and then we would also contact the resident, and we would work on staffing to see how we can mobilize troops to give that person coverage, as well as, I guess, some sort of token of, like, you know, we're sorry that this happened.
Yeah.
Anything else, guys?
No, and that's please.
And also respecting their privacy, but asking them, like, if there's, like, what exactly happened, but respect their privacy as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with every single piece of that. And it's sad, but really the first thing is the schedule, right? I mean, that has to be, I mean, yes, absolutely, contacting the PD, they need to be aware, absolutely. But your first concern is the schedule, right? They can't work anymore. And that's for an undetermined period of time. And I've had this happen, I've had a resident die, and then recently, and I kind of did it from the periphery, but an attending, a former graduate, shot and killed while at work. So that's just in the few years that I've been in this role. You got to let them know. You got to let the people around who are going to have to be relieved of duty know that, like for this example, that they're taken care of. It's not a problem. Even though it will be a problem, and it'll be tough to cover some things, and you're going to have to sacrifice yourself, which is what we'll talk about. But they don't need to know that. They will never need to know that. You're done. You're not working clinically. We've got it. Well, what about this? No, we've got it. How long? I don't know. However long you need. I don't know what the answer is to this. And that's how we work through that. It's not a month. It's not 2 months. It's whatever you need. You're going to know when you think you can come back. And then after that, you might have challenges where the first patient you see might remind you of your husband. Now you're going to be off again, because that's the appropriate way to handle that, right? So you control this. You control this. And be the leader. And I know that sounds like a boring thing to say, but like I feel like this, above and beyond any moment, is what's going to define you as a leader and show you the impact that you can have on your residency. Relieve residents as needed, and that's the sacrifice part. You know, if you have a resident who's in the CCU and they can't get the shift switched out and you need to work that shift, you work that shift. It might never be paid back, but that in and of itself is the role. Like, you're being there to support them, to give them what they need. To me, that's like crucial to the role of being a leader and a chief. And the support aspect, and that support aspect leads into like taking care of one of your own. And I've seen some amazing things happen. Residents, they put together meal plans, people were cooking meals, and they had a whole schedule board out where they were going to show up every day with stuff, like dropped it off, left them to their own. checking in with a resident, understanding that there's some privacy there too, and asking them, do you want me to check in? I'm just going to check in unless you tell me otherwise. And again, going back to that sacrifice. In these sort of instances, it's important for everyone to be together. It's important for everyone to go to funeral services or whatever kind of remembrance service that there is. And like to think about that idea of sacrifice in the brief time that I have, I'll talk about. So I was working a shift. At this point, it was like 2.5 years ago. And I finished the shift at 10, and I got home about 11. And I got a call from one of the chiefs saying, you know, Leah didn't show up for her shift. And I was like, well, that's very unlike her. Okay, let me know if it becomes an issue. And they were like, you know about it now, so it is an issue, and we just can't get a hold of her. So I was like, okay, well, check in with this family, and then let me know. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, the call came that they were worried. Police were involved, going to her house. So I was like, okay, I'm going to drive to her house. My wife was heavily pregnant at the time, so I had to try and explain to her why I was leaving at 2 in the morning to go to a female resident's house, because it was really hard for her to understand, right? You know? I was like, no, I got to go check. Something's not right, like in the pit of my stomach, like something's not right. So I drive up there. About 2:30, I get the call that she's dead. She's been found dead by the police. So then I turn around, I drive back, and as I'm driving back, I'm talking to my PD, Brad Bunny, about how the hell are we going to deal with this. So we were like, well, let's 7 in the morning, which was about 3 hours from that moment, get all the residents into the ED. We'll use a couple of the grieving rooms, you know, like those sort of private rooms. We'll tell them. So I didn't really sleep. Then they all came in, and I had to look them in the eye during different groups. Your colleague is dead. Watch what happened. Sent the relevant ones home. Worked their shift. Then the next day was like, well, let's bring everyone in together and tell the whole residency. Didn't really sleep that night, so I tried to deal with the logistical things. And this continued for like 4 or 5 days. And the only other time I've talked about this was this session last year, and it was quite therapeutic, actually. But nobody knows about like what went into those days, the amount of shifts that we covered, the amount of times that we sent people home because we didn't feel like they should be there. And they shouldn't know, right? Nobody needs to know about that. You don't get paid back for this stuff. No one comes up and says, thanks so much for being that rock. But that in and of itself is why we do it. That's why you're going to be in this role. And if you think this is not going to happen to you, and I hope that you're right, it very well may. It very well may, because the statistics are on the side that at least some people in here are going to have to deal with this situation. So your role is critical, absolutely critical to the success of the residency. And it's the reason that you became chief, whether you know it or not. It's these times of adversity that are really going to define you as a leader. So my time is up to review. Just focus on their success. Let them know that really you care about them as clinicians and people, and you want them to succeed. Communication and how you do it, and strategizing, taking them out of the ED to talk to them, how you deal with that is critical. Think through how you're going to be that leader. Be the PD's eyes and ears, that's an obvious one. And just know that you have the respect of your peers to work through and fix and put plans in place for all of these things. And your role is crucial to the success of the residency. I cannot overstate that. So, with that, thank you. Good luck for the coming year, and I appreciate your time.